Good afternoon, everyone, or depending where you are, it could be good morning or good evening. Thank you for joining us again today for what promises to be a wonderful Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships event. It's a remarkable time in infrastructure in Canada, particularly as it relates to urban transit. And we're very pleased today to be hosting this live webinar with both Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario, of course, the two leader organizations that are driving this agenda on behalf of Ontario. For those of you who don't know, my name is Mark Romoff. I'm President and CEO of the Council, and I'm honored to be here today to really act as an MC, if you like, for what promises to be a really wonderful conversation featuring, as I mentioned, two of the leaders in the sector. We've got Phil Verster with us, who's President and CEO of Metrolinx, and of course, Michael Lindsay, President and CEO of Infrastructure Ontario. Couldn't imagine two better spokespersons on this high-profile subject. At first, what I'd like to do, of course, is thank Ellis Dawn, and particularly Max Mantha, who's here with us today, for agreeing to sponsor today's event. I mean, everybody who organizes events knows clearly that without sponsors, it's just not possible. So again, I want to thank Ellis Dawn, a company that's obviously been a very long-standing supporter of the Council, and we're delighted that you're here with us today, Max, and I'll give you the floor in just a few minutes. I really didn't want to say much beyond we all know that in the last few weeks, the federal government and the province of Ontario have made a major announcement, a collaborative effort in order to enable major urban transit projects to go ahead in Ontario. It's in excess of $14 billion, that partnership. That's really quite remarkable. And I think it will enable Ontario to really jumpstart and deliver its very ambitious $28.5 billion urban transit agenda. Those are pretty impressive numbers. And this partnership, I think, is an important reflection of both the federal government and the province's commitment to really doing what it can to enable urban transit to, in fact, make the most significant contribution possible to the quality of life of Ontarians. And that's really the bottom line for infrastructure. We can talk about lots of other things for sure. There's lots of economic impact in terms of, contribution to Ontario prosperity and global competitiveness, contribution to productivity. But the reality is it's about the quality of life for me and you, and for that matter, Phil, Michael, Max, all of us benefit from a program like this. And so again, it's a privilege for the Council to have been asked to be the platform for today's discussion. I can promise you without a doubt, these two principles, they will make for very informative discussion today. The format will be a little bit different. We're going to start off with Phil taking a few minutes for some opening remarks. And then Michael Lindsay will be next up to bat. And after they've had that opportunity to set the scene with some brief remarks, we will be turning to a bit of a fireside chat, following which we'll open up the questions to the audience. So I would ask you to start thinking about those along the way. And quite frankly, the process to send in questions is very simple. So just use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screens, and you can already see that chat column on the right. So please feel free to use that as the mechanism to get your questions in. And we've also got an upvote facility. So if there are questions that you've seen asked already that you think you really want to move up to the top of the list, then you can arrange for that through this upvoting mechanism. So I'm not going to take any more time. I am actually pleased now to hand the microphone and the podium over to Max Mantha. Many of you know Max. He's Senior Vice President at Ellis Dawn. So wonderful to have you with us, Max. And again, thank you so much for being our sponsor today. So over to you.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here today. Thank you very much, Mark. It's great to be able to participate and hear how Metrolinx, IO, and governments are working together with the private sector to deliver this huge next wave of mega transit infrastructure in the GTHA. As we all emerge from a really challenging year. It's a perfect time to get our industry together, look forward, and plan out the build. My name is Max Mantha from Ellis Don. We're a construction services company that is so proud to play a big role in the development of key infrastructure here in Toronto and right across the country. Ellis Don's been part of 47 P3s so far, and 35 of them have now reached substantial completion. So we're very proud of that and looking forward to hear both what Phil and Michael have planned ahead for us. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our two guests, Phil Verster, President and CEO of Metrolinx, and Michael Lindsay, President and CEO of Infrastructure Ontario. In his role at Metrolinx, Phil leads a team committed to transforming transportation in the GTHA. Metrolinx's goal is to bring together the entire region, getting people where they need to go faster and simpler than ever before. In 2020, Michael Lindsay became President and CEO of IO, where he and his team work with partners in both the public and private sectors to build, manage, finance, and enhance the value of the province assets. Michael has a long history with IO, having previously served as President of Project Delivery and Senior Vice President of Commercial Projects. Now, I'd like to welcome Phil and Michael to join us. Looking forward to a great conversation, guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Max. Much appreciated. Just to frame our conversation, collectively, IO and Metrolinx work extremely closely together to deliver our overall program. In the past year, despite COVID, we've completed $4.5 billion worth of transit infrastructure. Amongst those are 6 or 7 really big completed pieces of work, such as our Cooksville station rebuild and car park, where Ellis Don was the major front party. But this is part of an overall $70 billion approved project list into the next 10 years. And while the coming year we've got this $5.5 billion scope of what we're going to complete, it's going to be about $1 billion more than what we did last year. We are very much focused on what is the way to procure and deliver the remaining scope of our forward project list. And we've seen interesting things that's helping us along this journey. And if I frame it for you like this, is the biggest issue always on these projects is quite simply the risk transfer. And there are different ways you can look at the risk transfer. You can either, and the two most dominant ones which we've seen now and which we are carefully considering is, if I take the fact of taking big projects and fragmenting them up in packages, which we can then award to the market based on their speciality, that's a great example of what we've done on our two subway projects, the Scarborough Subway Extension and the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension. In a record time, 15 months during a COVID year, we've brought those two projects to financial close last week and this week. And as little as 2 weeks from now, we're going to have construction of launch sites right there at the launch sites and spades in the ground. And so fragmenting the project, and instead of letting it as one big DBF with all of the risk transfer that you try and negotiate in advance through agreement or through pre-agreed risk transfers and allocation risk transfers, I'm not convinced. That keeps a lot of lawyers busy, and I'm not sure that keeps us productive and functional. And then we look slightly, so that's part of the risk transfer, and that's something I'm thinking of, and Michael and myself are considering very carefully as an ongoing strategy of how we get risk assigned to parties best equipped to manage that risk. And then there's a second really important frame of mind that I just seen the success of, and that's early contractor involvement in the design phase. Instead of being out in market asking for a fixed price on something that still needs designers to look at it, before designers have looked at it and before they've looked at the risk transfer, to ask for a fixed price feels like asking for risk premiums and uncertainty. And a development phase where parties work together has proven hugely successful. I'll give you two very important examples. One is on our alliance project that we have in the Union Station enhancement project for more platforms at Union Station. And our partnership with our alliance that we have there is fabulous. And the collaboration and the setting of costs, setting of targets, and behaviors of collaboration rather than arm's length fixed price thinking has been really, truly successful. And similarly, what we're doing on the Encore and Go expansion, where we have this real focus on a development phase, and the benefits we've seen from a development phase have been phenomenal. And so I think what's happening, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. I think what's happening is sort of public-private partnerships was always about getting the best of both worlds and getting the private sector to contribute to the public sector's objective. I think where we're getting to now is really into the meat and potatoes of how do we actually create better delivery models, long-term delivery models that start off on a better footing, works at a better footing during the construction phase, and provides you with all of the reasons for success for the maintenance and delivery phase to follow thereafter. Got to do this. $70 billion of work, next 10 years, and at sort of fixed price, risk-based, adversarial, arm's length contract delivery is not the right way to go forward. So we need to figure out how to do this better, and we are. And I think what you've seen is a major shift over the last 2 years, and that's evident in the success we're having now with the subway projects as we deliver them, and also how we go to market on the other projects. With that, I'll hand over to Michael. Michael, your views.
Thanks, Phil, and good afternoon, everybody, friends and colleagues. Hope you are healthy, happy, hopeful, not hearing the same echo of my voice that I am in this present moment. Both Phil and I are cricket fans, and one of the beauties of going after Phil is that he's already hit for 6, and I just get to run back and forth between the wickets. Much of what he's offered, I think, is right on point in respect to commentary, and I'll try to add a few thoughts to it. I want to maximize the amount of time that we have for questions. But first, let me start by thanking Max and the team at Ellis Don for sponsoring this event. Sincerely appreciated. And let me thank Mark for his service to this organization over the past 10 years. Mark, you've led double C, triple P to a place of great maturity and sophistication through times of great change and great challenge, both for your organization and our industry at large. You've been a champion at home and abroad for Ontario and for Canada more broadly in respect of our P3 program. And I think we're rightfully recognized, particularly here in Ontario, as having built something pretty special. And you're a big part of that, my friend, our most prolific promoter, particularly south of the border and overseas. So our thanks. Since Phil touched upon risk, and I think we're going to talk quite a bit about that in the Q&A, let me talk about transparency, because I think it's always been at the heart of what we've been trying to achieve in the province of Ontario for our market. And it goes hand in hand with this type of evolution that Phil and I are going to describe today. As you know, Infrastructure Ontario has committed now to releasing its market update on a quarterly basis. And that increased frequency is meant to give the industry more up-to-date information and assurance as to when projects are coming to market and how they're coming to market, because we understand the investments that are ultimately required to be a bidding presence in this market and the types of teaming discussions that have to happen in order to make that so, particularly in this moment where we know the wider infrastructure sector, particularly on a continental basis, is really heating up, and that our counterparties have options in respect of where they're going to invest their time and effort in pursuing projects. I would point at one update that we recently made in our April market update, which was to try to deepen that transparency by now including detail related to when planning, design, and compliance contracts, as well as technical advisory contracts, are going to be led for these projects. We know the capacity of the people who advise us in these ways is every bit as important to the successful delivery of these projects as getting the right procurements often. And we'll continue to listen to our industry partners in respect of anything that would be a valuable addition to that transparency. Just because I love the coefficients, I'll go back to that April market update and I'll stress again that it included 41 projects with 27 projects in pre-procurement and 14 in active procurement that totaled about 60 billion in contract. We at the time confirmed that 2 of the 3 Ontario line contracts and 2 of the 3 subways extension projects are scheduled to be in market next quarter, which really excites us. Excites us almost as much as the events of the last 6 days. It was an incredibly proud moment for both Metrolinx and IO to be able to the financial close the Eglinton Crosstown subway extension, the tunneling contract, as well as a similar tunneling contract for the Scarborough subway extension yesterday. I think it's fair to say we all know how many times subways have been announced over the years in this particular region. But as I say, it fills us with an incredible amount of pride that we've now let 2 construction contracts for subways extensions in this region, the first in 13 years. As my friend Phil says, it's happening. But Phil's right. In order to make these projects a reality, I think we intuitively understand that they won't all be delivered using the traditional models of P3 that were our bread and butter when Mark began leading Double C, Triple P. And the way that I would think about it, just to build on Phil's commentary, is for us, it's really going to be about the right contract form for the right job. And across all contract forms, trying to find ways to drive more collaboration, to more proactively identify the risks that are going to prove troublesome for these projects, and to come up with ways to incentivize both partners and contracting authority to solve for them. Phil is absolutely right when he says that our market has evolved in dramatic ways, and I think that the experience of the past year and a bit has accelerated many of the trends that we saw at play. So yes, we are looking at new approaches to contracting, how we do delivery model selection, refinements to our procurement approaches to make sure that we're getting the right balance in respect of technical wherewithal and sophistication of design alongside of price and financial envelope. And I guess I'd end on this thought. We really want to connect as an industry and to keep talking. I think we all intuitively know that delivering major capital projects means that there's going to be disputes as between us and our counterparts. That's par for the course, whether you're in the public sector or the private sector. But I'm personally committed to constantly sharing and listening so that we can continue to build great partnerships that serve the people of Ontario well on topics that range from dispute resolution to insurance to geotechnical reliance to the way in which we ring fence risks and shape contract packages that come to market. Anyway, let me leave it there because I know that that's exactly what today is all about. So Mark, I'll hand it back to you so that we can get on with it.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thank you, Phil, too. Good scene-setting remarks, and I might add, too, probably will provoke some folks to want to pose a few questions to you. This isn't going to be a celebration yet of urban transit. That will come without a doubt. But I know that industry is so committed to making a serious contribution to the success of what is a major initiative. So I think this is a great forum to give people an opportunity to clarify a couple of issues. So To the extent that you can have a fireside chat virtually, here we are. If nothing else, it's warm enough outside today to feel like it. So that's good. So what I thought we could do is maybe start with a few questions, remind people in the audience that they can ask a question too by simply clicking on the Ask a Question function rather at the bottom of their screen. And I'll keep an eye on those as we go along. But maybe I can start with you, Phil, on a question that you, I think, would probably expect. I mean, we've seen a significant disruption as a result of COVID-19. And I'm just wondering if maybe you could start by giving us an idea of the overall effect it's had on the GTAJ transit program in terms of delivery timelines. Could you start us there, and maybe Michael, you can join in after?
For sure. So we have given we've given clear invitation to our whole supply chain on all of our projects, whether it's whatever the contract form, whether it's a conventional P3 or whether it's a conventional design build or design bid build contract, to come and talk to us about what is the impact of COVID on, and what has the impact of COVID been. And we're very sympathetic to the fact that it's not so easy to quantify. There's really weird things happened during COVID. I mean, steel prices went in a direction. Availability of concrete went into a certain direction because all of the components to achieve a concrete mix was not all flowing through the supply chain as it could have been. Tasks that for years have been done by 4 people working within 2 foot of each other now had to be done by 2 people working 6 foot away from each other, and all different. And so 50 years of construction experience had to be adjusted during construction period. So it's not easy to assess the impact. And then balancing that sort of legal, commercial, contractual readiness and preparedness for the impact was, contracts didn't account for that. So taking a very practical and philosophical view on this, third parties are there to arbitrate, decide, and make rulings on what contracts say or where liabilities fall. And once those rulings are made, we deal with those rulings and figure out how to deliver our projects that are right in front of us. And we'll be doing that. The fact of the matter is, got to have a longer term view. 70 billion of transit projects into the next 10 years require us to look at our supply chain and our supply issues with a 10, 15, 20-year forward view, and we need to deal with COVID and get beyond that, and we're doing that.
Yeah, Mark, if you permit me, maybe I'll just add 2 thoughts. The first of which is a note of congratulations to staff at Metrolinx IO and other private sector partners for all that they've done to deliver on an adapted basis through the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of those adaptations about the ways in which we collaborate with one another, whether it's virtual meetings or the way we do works reviews, I expect will outlive the pandemic itself, and that's to the benefit of our industry. The only other thing that I guess I'd flag is that, Phil and I are quite aware of the need as we let out new contracts to be thoughtful with legal counsel about what they specify vis-a-vis pandemic risk, and those who've participated, to either the subways, tunnels projects, or QEW Credit River Bridge, or some of the other projects that have been pushed out there. Hopefully, will have seen some of our thoughtfulness in respect of. But Phil has it exactly. We are very much in the space of wanting to understand and have a conversation about what the impacts of the pandemic have been, realizing that we have years ahead of us to deliver with our partners.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit now about some of the specific projects that are on the agenda today. So the Ontario line, obviously one of the key projects for Ontario, and obviously really desperately needed relief for Toronto subway system. So can you tell us how the business case and projections for that project have changed given ridership numbers have dropped and potential work from home setups are becoming a little more permanent? And if nothing else, the world is changing. So I'm wondering, Phil, maybe you could take a crack at that, and I'll come back as well to Michael.
So this may feel counterintuitive or may come as a surprise, but the business case is unaffected. So you got to be realistic here. We're building these subway projects for the next 100 years. And you've got a world economy that is, well, stock markets behaved funny during last year and went in interesting directions, but we've got a world economy that is recharging and getting out of the starting blocks with great gusto. So fact is, 100,000 people join the Greater Toronto Area economy every year, and there's nothing to suggest that that's not going to continue. So you cannot revise. Our business cases are done on 60-year timelines, but these are 100, 150-year projects that will keep on dealing with very complicated and complex different market segments, complex reasons for travel. Yeah, for sure. There are some people that more people are going to work from home. And even my own organization, we think about how to strike that balance. You look across the world and we look carefully at what's happening in other jurisdictions, and different countries and different communities respond differently, and no impact. This is, the one thing about transit that's for definite is transit is the forerunner for economic development. Transit is a economic play. It's nothing else if it's not an economic play. Transit drives the economy of a region, and as such, nothing changes. Now, what less so in subways, but what I would say to you on GO expansion, we're looking really carefully. Are we going to run 12-car trains in and out in the morning, out in the evening as we've done before? I don't think so. I think that what we do on GO expansion to create more capacity for more two-directional, bi-directional travel and have more 4-car trains traveling out to a new head office in Pickering or a new head office out in Oakville, rather than everyone being downtown in Toronto. That's a different reality. And the investments we've got on GO expansion and Encore adjust to that. But subway railways are point-to-point, short distance, inner city, nothing changes.
Well said. And Mark, maybe I'd add only one more note for the learned audience that is CCCPP, because I think there is one final confusion that is out there still, and it's bound up in questions I get, for instance, from reporters or industry associations about whether change in ridership projections, whether that would change the underlying financial viability of these investments. I think it's important to clarify that none of the projects that Metrolinx and IO have or are planning to bring to market have concessions in which ridership would impact the viability of the procurement and or the contract itself. It's definitely true that there's been much conversation about that in Canada with the creation of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, but that's just one point of clarification that I think it's always worth making. Phil's exactly right. The ridership case continues to be strong, and frankly, it doesn't bear on the underlying procurement contract.
So that's a nice segue to the next question I've got in mind for you, Michael. I mean, as you know, there are several projects that are currently underway or nearing completion. The Eglinton Crosstown, which is just 50 meters from my house, falls in that category. Can you give us an idea of what lessons have been learned from those projects and how agencies like yourselves and Metrolinx are applying those lessons now as you move forward with the current projects that you are planning?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And look, you're right. My commentary is not specific to Eglinton Crosstown. I think what I'm about to describe is the lived experience of all Canadian jurisdictions, maybe even all continental jurisdictions that have tried to bring off major and complex transit projects like the Eglinton Crosstown in the past decade or two. And it's back to what Phil said off the top. This is all about risk, how we reduce it, how we assign it, where we share it, how we mitigate it. And I think we're interested in each one of those questions and the answer to them. And the first thing that I would highlight is, Metrolinx and IO have worked closely with the government of Ontario to pass a piece of legislation entitled the Building Transit Faster Act. It takes specific aim, I think, at strengthening provincial regulatory ability in order to eliminate risks where possible, in connection particularly to permits, licenses, and approvals, which again is a bundle of risks that's been troublesome for various transit projects across the country, and where there is more that could be done quite directly through government action in order to reduce those risks. But beyond that, the kinds of things that we're learning and playing forward into subways, tunnels procurements, for instance, are the sorts of things that Phil was pointing at earlier on. Far more willingness on behalf of the contracting authority to share responsibility for certain risks, finding ways to provide incentives to both parties to effectively manage those risks. On specific risks that have been so troublesome in the past, doing things that industry has been asking us for a while around the degree to which geotechnical information that's provided by the contracting authority can be relied on. I think that these are big things, even before we begin to think about switching contract forms and models that are happening in the sorts of models that we've been using that fundamentally change the underlying risk transfer inherent within them. And I trust that the audience is hearing with one pretty unified voice from both Metrolinx and IO that they should expect more of that.
Yeah. And Mark, starting with risks, Michael is, Michael says it well. Geotech is one of those where, you can have a very clever strategy to transfer risk to someone else on that. Is that in the end a good outcome to have a very clever strategy to transfer the risk? I don't think so. Some risks are probably best not transferred, because even though you transfer it, it creates quite a lot of pain and aggravation once the risk is transferred. And sometimes bidders are in a situation where they decide to take on risk, which can turn out afterwards to be really painful. So for everyone's sanity, it's probably better that you take a more measured view on risk transfer. And I think that reflects a degree of maturity where IO and Metrolinx jointly has definitely reached. I want to take a really banal example, though, on these projects and just take a view on a very, very blunt observation. And that is, get the design phase right. If the design phase aren't right, everything suffers. And we see it directly. If the design doesn't go fast enough, a week lost in design or 2 weeks lost in design have all of the potential, depending on which 2 weeks it is, to become a $100 or $150 million problem later. It's as simple as that. Fragmented designs, in order to keep the construction process going, you do a fragmented design, and it's a slippery slope. How fragmented designs affect permits, licenses, and approvals, then affect construction in the end. The design phase is everything, and that's how well constructors get engineering companies to be partners and colleagues, which comes full circle for me to this principle of getting engineers and constructors involved in a development phase up front before a price is finalized. And, we can talk as much as we like about contract form. It's not about contract form. The contract form is an outcome, whether it's a CM at risk or whether it's a fixed price or whatever. That's a decision right at the back end of the process. How do we fix the price or not? is a decision at the end of the process. That should not drive our thinking at the front end of the process. Front end of the process should be about how do we eradicate risks for both of us? How do we fix up which one of us will do what risks? And then how do we work together to deliver that?
Thanks. That's really helpful. We are getting lots of questions coming in, so I'll turn to one of those in a moment. But I thought maybe before we did that, maybe Phil, you could give me a bit of an update, give us a bit of an update on the Hamilton LRT project, because that too was obviously a focus of the announcements by both the federal and Ontario governments just a little while ago.
You know, you look at LRT projects anywhere, and while I say transit is an economic driver, I should say LRT projects is even more so, and even more so an economic driver in a local environment. And I personally think, and I've said so to the mayor of Hamilton a couple of times, I think an LRT project will transform that city. I think something like a BRT project could have transformed the city as well, but an LRT project is an extremely attractive project, and it can transform that city. Local economic development, and fabulous potential that can go with any LRT, and you'll see that. You'll see that Eglinton LRT is going to drive change. Ontario down Mississauga and Brampton is going to totally transform Ontario, and so in Finch West. And so what we are doing now is we're mobilizing. We're going to approach, Michael and myself have worked with our teams. We're going to approach Hamilton in a way that was very innovative, and we're going to learn from the lessons of the first procurement. And instead of going out with one big procurement, we're going to think carefully of how we're going to, as I say, package it up, fragment it up, and figure out how we get the right bits to the market in the right way and deal with the risks in the right way. There's a lot of utility work in Hamilton that needs to be addressed, and got to ask yourself, for a relatively small fleet, are we going to ask the market to bid us a relatively small fleet, or are we just going to, through our existing channels, buy a fleet and issue it to the successful bidder? So that's sort of the interesting, tantalizing type of thoughts that we're working through, and the market would clearly see from the way we are asking the market what our direction of thinking is. I still think this is Hamilton's going to benefit so much from a transit solution right in the middle of the city.
Yeah. Well, I've got a corollary, I guess, to that question. So is there any information that you can provide on either the timing or the possible delivery model that you're considering?
Oh, there's lots of information I can provide, but it'll be premature. So we're gonna look. We're not in the business, for both Michael and myself, for years now. We don't declare completion dates because completion dates are depending on the market bidding and stuff like that. So we won't do that. But the procurement model is going to be along the lines that Michael and myself have discussed here. On the high-risk items, which are typically the underground items, we're going to have progressive methods and engage people with us and get that work done and get that risk removed. Not ask someone to bid that somewhere in a design room, fixed price, remote from the job. And then we're going to figure out how to do the fleet, which is a big risk item, and then the rest is easy.
Fair enough. Michael, this one may be for you. Will Ontario move away from cheapest priced wins on the big projects in favor of, say, best for project in terms of skill, commitment to complete the project, and relevant experience?
Look, I think we want to get that balance right, Mark, is what I would say, right? Again, we have a tendency, I think, to fixate sometimes on contract forms and models, where we should begin is in respective objectives. And I know it's true for IO, and I know it's true for Metrolinx, that we're in the business of protecting taxpayers and getting value for taxpayers. So that'll always animate everything that we do. But I think it's also important to note that there's lots of different ways to think about what constitutes that sort of value. And the intrinsic characteristics of a project can predict oftentimes the approach we would take. Because sometimes you're building a hospital at a reasonably greenfield site on a fairly templated basis, and you're really fine to solve for price envelope and maximum amount of fixed price risk transfer. Other times you're solving for rapidity of delivery or technical design excellence or the flexibility that you require to build in a brownfield environment, or for my friend Phil, often in an active operating environment, often with dense sets of ownership rights that go with that. So for us, I think objectives predict contract form, but in all of them, yes, you're right. I think what we are thoughtful about in this present moment is whether we've got the right approach within procurement to sufficiently emphasize both technical design and its sophistication, whether we've got the right process to enable us, as Phil says, to develop that design to important points of inflection where we feel like we've got a certain maturity in respect of that development that we aren't going to run into issues downstream. And then we want to balance that off in respect of evaluation to financial envelope. So both in respect of the number of points given to technical evaluation or the gearing of that relative financial envelope, people can expect to see some movement. And as a final thought, I don't believe that this is, certainly not for me, announcing the fact that we're never going to do a DBF or a DBFM again. I think we will. I think in many places and spaces, that's exactly the right contract form to use, with some risk transfer adaptations and some continued progress on the way we do design presentation meetings and the gearing of financial and technical. So it's not a black and white, we used to do this, we now do that. I think it's about solving for objectives on each project as best we can.
And sticking to Michael's thinking, we've awarded more than a $500 million contract for Union Station enhancement project, not on price at all. We're on the cusp of awarding a multi-billion-dollar contract on GO expansion without an initial fixed price driving the selection of the winner. So it's exactly as Michael says, based on the requirements, based on the nature of the job, based on how we package the job or fragment the job, we decide on the contract form thereafter. It's and it's if you have an appropriate risk management development phase up front, it doesn't matter if that's fixed price. It's very different to ask for a fixed price without a development phase. So it's not that simple, a discussion of fixed price or not. It's about how you get to a project, a contract award. Fact is, Mark, tongue in cheek, every contract will have a price, will have a final price. It'll have a final price after claims or after agreements or whatever. There is always a final price. And it's just the process to get to something that is managed and value for money. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it is complicated. So again, you mentioned the project at the train station downtown. So here's a related question. This person is saying risks don't go away in the alliancing or partnering type of procurement. In fact, logically, more risk must rest with the public sector. So the questioner here is asking, is the public sector ready to manage this additional risk?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the issue around risks is about who gears up to manage and contain a risk and deliver it. And when we think about risks, already we simplify it. We think there's a risk for me and there's a risk for you, and you're going to manage yours and I'm going to manage mine. Risks very seldom work out that simply. That can be bucketed up and given to one party and taken away by another party. I call it indivisible. Many risks are indivisible. So at some stages of managing a risk, it's fully under the control of party A. And then in other stages, awkward stages perhaps, it's fully under the control of party B. And so if you in your contract very smartly make party A responsible for that full risk, knowing that there'll be phases where you can influence that risk, you may not gear up to manage it if you don't realize it. You may not be equipped to deal with what would come your way at that critical point, and the risk would all land with party A. So the way to look at this whole thing of risk management is you got to just join. In some risks are so complicated, you just got to join with the other party, join at the hip, and manage it as if you are one team. You just have to do that. So it's not a simple equation as your question was phrased. The risks don't go away. They definitely don't go away. You are just better equipped as a joint team to deal with it together collectively as a unit.
Yeah, and I think what I'd say to build on that is, I discern in the specific question, an underlying push or prompt about whether folks at IO and Metrolinx are ready to step into the responsibilities that will go with new approaches to management of risk. And there, I would just want to convey, hopefully as much as I can, a sense of confidence to the people listening that yes, indeed, Phil and I are thinking about our respective organization and how we invest in the right capabilities to step into an alliance construct and to play the appropriate role as a partner in a construct like that. Just as we're thinking about the approach to project controls and management that would go with, the use of CM&R models on larger projects. Indeed, that's the way that we decided that we wanted to go. So I think the question is perceptive, and it consumes a lot of our respective time. Would be what I'm making sure that we're ready to meet the industry at the nexus of these models and to play the role that is for us.
And give a practical example, Mark. And it's out there in the industry, so everyone knows, so we may as well just talk about it. So we know that in some areas of us delivering risks that previously were sourced out under the older contracts all to the supply chain, we'll need more muscular power on our side. And we've got two inquiries out there for what we call development partners, delivery partners. And the delivery partners are people literally that join and strengthen our own teams that have more line direct construction experience, can assist with on-site works, drive on-site works, deal with our relationships with our utility providers, permits, licenses, and approvals. So we'll apply these delivery partners in a shape and form, and we spend a lot of time with the supply chain and the market to explain what the delivery partner role is. So yes, for definite. It'll require, as Michael says, IO and Metrolinx to take on a different shape and have different teams, and that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Phil. I have a question here on transit-oriented development, which I know now we're calling transit-oriented communities. So how is the TOC program going, and how much take-up on TOC proposals have you received from the private sector? And can you give examples maybe and talk a little bit about what you're hoping for from the private sector?
Lots of enthusiasm, lots of engagement. But let me take a step back, right? Because transit-oriented development, transit-oriented communities, not a new concept, not a new idea. Something that in this region, I think we struggled to bring off in connection to transit investment, but very much at the heart of strategies that major cities around the globe have used to ensure that as they make these incredibly catalytic investments in transit projects that have all the benefit that Phil has been pointing at, that they're thinking about the relationship between transit, housing, commercial spaces, recreational spaces, in order to create vibrant and complete communities. And it's on that basis that we're proceeding, talking not only to municipal partners, but also local stakeholders about how we take a thoughtful approach to planning that really, at the end of it, takes specific aim at a bunch of, I think, closely held and widely shared objectives. Increase accessibility to transit, reduce congestion, create more jobs, create more housing, strengthen neighborhoods. So I'm excited about the fact that we have quite intentionally planned these various transit projects to encompass a possibility of doing transit to communities in certain places reasonably immediately, in other places through the hardening of the investments in the underlying transit assets that would allow for development over time. But to your specific question, yeah, I think a really vibrant conversation is happening right now with a set of parties at a variety of sites, and lots of people asking how they can get involved downstream in bringing some of their thinking about what could get created at individual sites to us. So really excited to continue that conversation, and really excited to continue to do it in partnership with local municipalities and regions, with whom we have memorandum of understanding, or at least the government of Ontario is, in respect of our approach to TOC. So I think a program long overdue and really exciting.
Thanks, Michael. This is a bit of a long question, so be patient with me. It's currently subtrades have not made allowances within their project estimates to cover COVID costs and dramatic material price escalation resulting from supply shortages due to COVID. So new projects going forward will carry a significant premium for this, which may or may not be required on the project. As an alternative, would IO and Metrolinx consider contract language that allows the subtrades to recoup these costs in the event that they arise? And this estimates risk for the subtrade and allows these projects to be priced more competitively while eliminating cash flow issues and conflict down the road. Any thoughts?
Well, in fact, we have done so, would be my answer. On the projects that we have brought to market and have procured, the subway tunnels or the QEW Credit River Bridge, we've already stipulated a regime within the project that talks about pandemic risk, both future pandemic risk as well as continuation or worsening of the conditions associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So obviously, I think that regime will begin to get more out there as we widen our conversation around various projects. But to anybody that is interested in understanding where we have set the bar on that, please do reach out to me, because happy to have that conversation with the industry for sure.
I think what we're seeing, Mark, is we're seeing a lot of disruptive impacts on the bidding process. We're seeing that. We're seeing, prices of steel come in at horrendous rates, higher than before. Lumber is also, just plain wood is unrecognizable prices. So there's lots of disruptive impacts. The concept sounds simpler than what it is. Concept sounds simpler than it's difficult to figure out how to actually make a concept like that truly workable. I think it's sort of a sign of the times, is there's going to be a wobble now in terms of the types of things we see, in terms of the market needs time to iron out the wrinkles and settle down. And we're gonna push through and place contracts in the meantime, and see how best we can ameliorate for those types of disruptive impacts. But it's very difficult to figure out a tidy, neat mechanism to try and equate something that's an unnatural wobble.
Thanks, Phil. Here's another question. With more collaborative forms of contracts with less focus on fixed price, what are your views towards private funding?
So
Mark, I take it, and apologies to the questioner if I'm about to mischaracterize their question, that they're asking about private finance and the role that lenders play in our projects.
Mm-hmm.
Here I would say, I'll refer you back to my earlier answer, which is in many projects, places and spaces, take it for instance on the social side of the business that I'm privileged to deliver with IO for the province of Ontario. I think there shall be DBFs, DBFMs with some underlying changes to risk transfer, approach to dispute resolution, etc. So I certainly continue to see a role for private finance in the wider Government of Ontario program of investment in infrastructure. And I continue to see value in the role that lenders play on those projects on behalf of the objective of protecting taxpayers and bringing appropriate pressure to bear, if I can put it that plainly, in connection with bringing jobs completed on time and budget. As Phil rightfully pointed out earlier, I think the other thing we'd want people to take away from this is the notion that an elongated period of development of a project could result at the end of that phase in a bunch of different ways to try to agree reasonably hard fixed pricing on some form of spectrum. The security that goes with that could easily include, in certain cases and places, role for private financiers. So again, back to this notion that I think we're animated most by what gets the right incentives, what gets the right behaviors, how do we solve for the objectives that we've been given. But for sure, there shall be a role for private finance in delivering infrastructure and going forward in the province of Ontario.
So what's interesting about Michael deals with this part of the question, which is about private finance, so eloquently and comprehensively that is exactly the right approach to it. I'll take that question and just approach it from a different angle. In order to have a public-private partnership, do we need private finance in there? And again, Michael's answer is spot on. For the right type of project, yes, but it's not an essential requirement. And if you, about 15, 20 minutes ago, Michael went through a fantastic explanation of projects drive everything. They drive the decisions on how to procure the contract form and how to do the risk distribution. And so if I take a very practical example, Eglinton Crosstown is a phenomenal project. And for sure, it's going to be later than what was originally enabled or originally bid. But it's a phenomenal project. And yesterday, the CTS team started a train delivered by Bombardier through Metrolinx, Bombardier stroke Alstom now, and collectively started to run it on the at-grade section, where we'll test power, overhead catenary system, signaling. It's fabulous. This is a project with private capital in it, so fabulous. But similarly, what do we really want from a P3? We want expertise, and we want knowledge and capability that makes a project successful. So there's as much benefit we get from what we just see as capability. And so when we think of P3s are really about a combination of skills and competencies. And private finance, in some cases, will help, in other cases are not required.
Thanks, Phil. Here's another question related to finance, obviously. So Canada prides itself on a vibrant bond market, which other countries, not a lot of other countries actually have. But government deficits are huge. Meanwhile, there is not enough product to invest in. Will future projects utilize more or less of private capital?
Asked and answered.
Would that be your answer too, Michael?
Look, I would say that there has been a really interesting policy discussion playing out in Canada for the past 4 years, right? Prompted by the federal government's announcement of the creation of the Canada Infrastructure. And it's beget a conversation within our wider industry about what projects give off revenue, what characteristics would a project need to have in order for there to be real interest on behalf of pension funds or any source of equity or financing to participate. And I would say that, Mark, some of the questions still seems bound up to me in what is still a kind of an unanswered premise there about the extent to which governments, plural, not just the province of Ontario, will find that concessionary models, allow them to change their borrowing assumptions vis-a-vis infrastructure spend, and that closely relates to other policies that government will have to decide on, for which Phil and I are not really responsible vis-a-vis, what assumptions on, for instance, tolling are possible on a concessionary road, etc. So I think for our part, as we think about these projects that we've been given, which don't depend on those types of concessionary models, Phil's right when he says we would refer you back to the past answer that we've given, but I would just acknowledge that conversation continues to play out in this case, in a very real way.
It's taking it bottom up. The requirement for private finance, it's got to originate with a requirement whether the project requires it to be successful. And I think if we sort of decide on project finance first and then figure out how we make it work in the project, then that doesn't feel like the right approach at all. So the fact that the bond market is vibrant and that there's money looking for a home doesn't necessarily mean it's beneficial to our projects at all.
Thanks. Here's another question that I know you've heard before. There was a recent legal settlement on the Eglinton project related to COVID, providing schedule and cost relief to the Crosslinks Consortium. Does this set a precedent for other major projects that have been under development during the pandemic?
Well, rulings are rulings, and so and I think I've said this before. I've got a very philosophical view about this. In Metrolinx, we've spent the last 3 years significantly beefing up our commercial approach to all of our contracts and all of our delivery. And at times we agree on matters, and then we make settlements, fairly large settlements, and that's order of the day. And I can point you to the settlements we've made, and they've all helped projects to be successful. But at the same time, there are sometimes things we don't disagree on. And then we refer those to a third party, whether that's the Superior Court or whether that's an arbitrator. And the court or the arbitrator makes a ruling, and I am always putting ourselves in a place of saying, we are bound by a ruling of a court, and when we go to arbitration, bind outcomes. Now, there are decisions here about whether this should be appealed or not. Those decisions will be made, and we are progressing that. Broadly speaking, though, the philosophy for me remains: we're commercial entities, and if we can't agree on something and the third party decides, we go with the third party. That's my personal view, and clearly that's the commercial stance that gives certainty to our commercial transactions. And there is this loose end of I call it a loose end. I should perhaps not call it as much of that, but there's an important consideration on whether there's a precedent set and whether it should be appealed or not. My intuitive response is business as usual. None of this is personal. All of this is just business. And we've got a ruling, we follow the ruling.
And if I broaden the answer beyond the ruling itself, because I think Phil's done a decent job of unpacking that. Look, I think our posture has always been with our counterparties through formal notices and informal conversation. Bring us your claims, and bring us the substantiated evidence of the harm. And look, I know we're not moving as fast as people would like to deal with that, which I think is a sign of the times across all manner of industries right now. The only thing that I would say is we are indeed commercial entities in the space of making commercial recommendations to political decision makers. And we want to have those conversations. So hope that they continue, and hope that the industry understands, ultimately at the end of the day, that like a public sector entity, we are going to be asked to demonstrate that certain things are true to substantiate harm in order to allow for the settlements to be made. So I would just make it honorable.
Okay, great, thanks. Here's another question. We've seen fewer and fewer P3s being long-term, so the market is hungry for product. And both IO and Metrolinx seem to be going the other way, that is towards other models, PBFs, alternative models. And in this person's point of view is that this undermines confidence of private placement investors and bond investors in the market. So in general, people are starting to think that Canadian P3s are on the decline, and maybe are turning to other opportunities south of the border. Any thoughts on those comments?
I think this is what makes some of the nuance in the message that Phil and I are trying to unpack here so tough. Because it's sort of another example of an understandable impulse, which is to say, you used to do this and now you do this. That's not what's happening in the province of Ontario. And look, that's why perhaps it's helpful to have Infrastructure Ontario here, because with the side of my business that is not transit, the baseline planning assumption is that we're going to look at our DBFM model, think about the way that we address some of the underlying risk transfer issues that have revealed themselves through the last decade of our continued maturation of that model. But we like it. We like it a lot. And if for no other reason that it has the long-term orientation that it does, we think it's very good public policy to ultimately make responsible a unified party, not only for construction of an asset like a hospital, but also for its maintenance over time. We think that that has real value to the taxpayer. So you get where I'm coming from, Mark, right? I think people tend to think, especially informed by the experience of other jurisdictions, oh, this is England or it's Australia, and we can expect the same sort of trajectory. I don't think it's that simple. And just as Phil says, he's got $70 billion worth of transit investment to make in the next 2 years. My $60 billion was not in transit. And a lot of that is going to be delivered through the sorts of models that, frankly, I think Ontario contributed to the failure around. Now, we have to be thoughtful about whether we've got the right basis of partnership in those models. But, I hope that everybody who can hear the sound of my voice has a confidence that there will still be quite a big amount of that contract form in our procurement.
Yeah. And Mark, the question seems to equate P3 with involvement of private capital in a contract form. It's not. Private capital in a contract form as part of a P3 or a PFI or whatever the terminology you want to use, whatever part of the world you're in, is a little bit of an outdated concept. The bond markets, lenders, and private capital have a role to play in some. But our alliance contract that we've got, and which we'll do more of, and how we're setting ourselves for Go expansion, is par excellence P3 projects, but they've got no private capital involved in it. So P3 is maturing into a place which is not private capital oriented. That's one part of the spectrum of P3s, call it in inverted commas. The real benefit of a P3 is not the private capital. I would argue it's not. I would argue it's getting A team for a particular project from the private sector, where delivery is about collaboration and each party delivering their very best. And private finance comes into it as a means to an end rather than an end itself. And I think it's just we're on a different trajectory now to get the best projects delivered in the best possible way.
And one more thought, Mark, just to personalize it, like in market now is the RFP for an exceptionally large correctional facility in Northern Ontario, in Thunder Bay, where our counterparties who are shortlisted on that know we are continuing with a traditional form of P3 model as understood traditionally by CCCCC. And most of the conversation we're having with your counterparties is about the characteristics of our approach to developing that project through the bid phase, what dispute resolution regime we're ultimately going to bake in and use to govern ourselves moving forward. So my hope is that there are those tangible examples that show that it's not a light switch on and off for DBFs and DBFN.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's very helpful. This is an interesting twist on that. So the questioner is saying Metrolinx will be managing a series of small to mid-sized DBs for elements of the program that you've been talking about. Is this correct? And can information be shared on this initiative?
No, so it's slightly different. That's one outcome depending on what the project is, but I can see that there could be a single outcome that we deliver, call it a project that has as part of it an alliance to deliver one phase, a single source to deliver another phase, and a DBF to resolve another package. It doesn't automatically become just a group of DBs or DBBs. That's not the... You see, the discussion seems to go to contract form quickly. We all want to know what the contract form is so that we know what to do during delivery. But it's not the starting point of the conversation. Starting point of the conversation is, what's the risk transfer? How do we figure out how we contain the risk? If I have an alliance, because some of the risks are just not definable upfront during a development phase, but will be indivisible and will emerge during the contract, then we're going to do it as an alliance format. And then we take it cost reimbursable with a pain gain share mechanism and a target price to it. Maybe we have a development phase and we can pin the risk down firmly. Then at the end of the development phase, we have a fixed price or a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price. Maybe it's all straightforward, reasonably straightforward in a large package. We very successfully placed the two tunnels on Eglinton Crosstown West and Scarborough as DBFs.
Yeah,
and that was easily done because it's a smallish supply chain. It's a uniform type of product delivery. It's not signaling and all of these other complexities wrapped into it's a tunnel boring machine, a tunnel, civil works associated with it. There are a couple of players which are really well geared up to just deliver it, and they step in and they come and do it. They're happy to do it. It's a DBF. So no, it's slightly more nuanced than what your question is phrased as.
Thanks. Let's go back to community consultation for a moment. It's been a bit of a hot button topic, as you know, for the Ontario line, because it's changed the route several times over the years. Can you give us an idea, Phil, of how you plan to manage that issue and ensure local buy-in on these projects?
Yeah, such a good question. Such a good question. You know, when you think of the genesis of a project, and you think of how projects get mandated, how projects get authorized, how projects get structured, it's about what are the outcomes that determine the choices according to which the project's delivered. If the entity delivers it as community consultation during the project design phase and development phase as a key deliverable, because it's a key outcome, key answerable, then community engagement is different to when it's the project is measured in terms of, transit efficiency, figure out what's the best answer, then work with the community to figure out how to implement it, not what to implement. I'll give you a classic example. And there's unfortunately not always clear information despite our best efforts on this. One of the reasons why the Ontario line will run in above ground in the section on Lakeshore East, East Harbour through that section, is because the economic benefit of having transfers at grade rather than a 40-meter deep station at East Harbour is huge. And there are some voices which may wonder why we don't just do the Ontario line underground everywhere. And the argument is an at-grade cross-platform type of transfer between Lakeshore East and the Ontario line. And Lakeshore East includes the Stouffville line as well, which would come on that section of line, has huge economic value. So we've got a very clear mandate to develop solutions that have economic value. So we have a different challenge now, and that is to work with that community, and we're doing everything to work with that community to achieve the outcome of the transit-wise economically best outcome. And this is more difficult and more challenging to do in a world where you are building this right in the middle of a developed city, and so there's no downplaying the crucial importance of how to work with a community. This is absolutely essential. And so in our approach, we are committing to use no parks for laydown, to build from the guideway and from the right-of-way to build outwards, to not build from the outside in, and therefore to minimize the disruption to communities, to affect as few trees as possible. And in the end, looks like we are going to structure our construction such that will only affect trees in our right-of-way and not trees in the neighborhood itself. So we have significantly adjusted our construction methodology and our way of working in response to what the Leslieville community and Riverside communities have shared with us. And I think it's really crucial that we do that, and that we keep on helping the community to understand what we are doing, and that we ask the community to help us to understand what's important to them and to listen to them. And this is what we're doing. Doesn't change the fact that it's immensely challenging to build in the middle of a city, and therefore it's immensely important to keep on working with the communities.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. I'm sensitive to our time. So with respect to implementing the alliance model, do you anticipate that there will be any challenges with the cultural shift that will need to occur both for the public and private sectors in order to effectively deliver the collaborative approach? If so, how can those challenges be addressed?
I don't think a culture shift is just a challenge. I think it's the challenge. It is the effective component, the efficient component, the essential component to an alliance is a culture shift, both in the public and private sector. It is. It absolutely is. The big philosophical shift and the important shift and why it's so important is that when you create an alliance, that team becomes independent of the mothership, becomes independent of the holding company in the private sector, and becomes independent of Metrolinx. That's a new team. That's a new team with a budget, and they make decisions not based on what Metrolinx wants or what IO wants or what the contracting parties may want, it becomes a team that must make a decision together, and they govern themselves in effect. And this is important. This is culturally really, really important. And that's why measures of sharing gain and sharing pain is important, and it must be reasonable. We're not asking people to join an alliance in order to just have a smart way of doing a new risk transfer to the private sector. This is about truly coming to grips with what a development phase looks like. I'll go so far, Mark, to say is that if you do not get the behavioral change, the alliance won't work. The alliance will just become another forum to have a claims battle in. And so the behavioral shift is everything. It's crucial.
Yeah. And I would say that it's incumbent upon Phil and I, and we are spending a lot of our time talking to the government of Ontario about what assumptions need to exist about the way in which the contracting authority shows up in various modes, and the degrees of decision-making freedom that are attendant in alliance, and what has and has not worked elsewhere, instructed by the experience of other jurisdictions that have been doing this for slightly longer than we. So we take seriously, I think, is the thing that I would stress. The fact that the cultural shift is not only for our wider industry, but also for those representing the contracting authority. And we never miss a turn to stress it, that if we're going to use this model intentionally as connected to some of the objectives that Phil has specified, which an alliance caters to, that has behaviors incumbent upon us as much as anybody else.
It's not an overnight thing. This is, organizations will cut their teeth on this, and it's part of the same sort of direction of travel that we've got towards progressive design, progressive build, deliver collaboratively, get to the right outcomes. It's not happening overnight. Currently, we see obviously a claims culture. Any claim that comes in is about 4 or 5 times higher than the actual cost, roughly speaking. It's got to change, and it will change. And then I'm convinced it'll change.
Thanks, Phil. One last question, fellas. How will USEP be aligned with the rest of Union Station within Encore, especially with the separate civil and O&M packages of the latter?
So what we're doing on that one is it aligns exceptionally well in the sense that when you think of multiple projects in that part of the corridor, I don't even want to share with you by last count how many things need to happen in that corridor, whether it's railway, whether it's only towers that must be shifted, whether that's flood protection works must be put in place. Quite a lot of things must happen. What USEP has turned out to be, fortuitously, that alliance is fortuitously positioned to do pieces of work that's phased in time, such that getting the work done and getting some of the work like track slewing, etc., in place early, allows for the sequencing of other works to follow thereafter to be done better. And so here's the thing. The broader example that the scheduling benefits we get from having the USEP and the alliance in USEP in place, the broader principle is an alliance is the example of everyone being in the same boat at the same time, rowing in the same direction. And that allows you to respond to issues. And the response from the USEP team, from the alliance team in the Union Station corridor has been exceptional. And that's the way forward.
And Mark, just because it was the last question, if you'll permit me to riff on it a bit, kind of I just want to return to the theme that I opened with, which is transparency. This is why we do quarterly updates to our pipeline here in Ontario. Practice that I think many other jurisdictions are now starting to emulate precisely because they understand the partner of providing predictably to counterparties a sense of timing and a sense of approach. So looking forward to being back before industry in about a month for that quarterly update. And I think you will see the resolution of some of those TBDs, but you will also continue to see that projects like the Kingston Health Sciences Center or the KGH redevelopment listed as a DBF. That should be everybody's expectation, that it will be a bit best approach for purpose, and that we commit as soon as we can and with the greatest degree of transparency to giving industry predictability as to how we approach these things.
Well, folks, thank you both, Phil and Michael. This is this is an exciting agenda, unprecedented, I believe, certainly in Canada and in many other jurisdictions. Everybody's interested in this. Questions are not always easy, but I appreciate the fact that both of you shied away from none of them, right? So that's really important. And I know that there'll continue to be questions. That's fine. But I think the opportunity to have a dialogue like this is very constructive and very productive. And I know you're doing it offline too, right? So I really do appreciate that. It makes a huge difference. So thank you for that. And thank you, audience, for all the questions, because it's great. You've really been engaged right through the conversation. And thank you also to Max Nantha and the gang at Ellis Don, because again, I would say that we wouldn't be able to bring you these unbelievable two individuals today if it wasn't because of our sponsor, and in this case, because of Ellis Don. So it's hugely appreciated. Now, just before I finish off, as many of you know, the council.
Before you do that, Mark, I just want to say you were an excellent host, and we wish you the very best. In the beginning there, Michael, congratulations you on many years of service to C2P3. Service to all of us has been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Oh, you didn't quite come off mute there, Mark.
You see, it's because I can't deal with those kinds of kind comments. Thank you very much. So before I get too verklempt about this, let me just actually say a few things that are about what's coming up with the council. I haven't left yet, so here's my last chance. So lots of stuff happening. As you know, we've got this new monthly Candid Conversation series. We've had great speakers over the last couple of months, and join us again in June. Because we're going to have the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, Bill Matthews, as our speaker. That's going to be a great session. We're also, of course, moving ahead with our conference. It'll be a virtual event. It's taking place on November 16th to 18th. It won't be long before a first iteration of that program will be into the public space, so stay tuned for that. And again, for many of the events that we're involved in, notably our Candid Conversations, these are restricted to our members. So my message really is that for those of you who, for whatever reason at the moment, aren't members, I'd suggest you rethink that because we got lots on the agenda over the coming months. And I think you'll find it advantageous to be a member. I hope so in any event. So, as people keep saying, apparently I'm leaving now, whether I like it or not. So I actually do. Oops, that might be my wife saying, "Are you really leaving, hon?" I don't know. Anyway, the reality is that I will be stepping down on May 31st. That isn't very far away. It's the end of the council's fiscal year. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of you that are in the audience today, both members and non-members. It's been really a pleasure to have been able to spend time in what is clearly the hottest sector in Canada, and quite frankly, even more so now as we focus, and politicians and governments across the country focus on economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. Infrastructure will be critical, and everybody in this audience today has an obligation a responsibility, and I hope opportunity to make a contribution to make that successful. So let me finish by simply saying that I want to thank the team at the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, Andrew Coolsbergen, Jennifer Robinson, Carla Walmsley. They have worked hard. You know, they're creative folks. They've done a great job. And as both of you CEOs well know, boy, are we difficult to manage, right? So it's the team around us that makes that possible. And those three individuals are the ones who do it at the council. So a big thank you to everyone today for joining us. I just hope that you'll remain focused and that the opportunities we talked about today will be ones that you can be big players in. So thanks again for your time. Have a great day. And I look forward somehow, some way of having the chance to interact with all of you again. I have no idea what the world looks like over the months ahead, but I can't imagine that I'm just going to disappear. So retirement ain't an option. Thank you all very much. And as I said earlier, have a wonderful day.
Stay safe, everybody.